Okay, we're live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the channel. Today we have a few guests with us, and we are going to be talking about the concept of objective truth. So I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to just introduce yourself, and the channel links are in the description, except for JMD. I will be putting your link in the description. You were a latecomer, so I didn't get you in before I set everything up, but it'll be in there by the time this is over. So I will start with you, JMD, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Oh yeah, I'm just a small apologetics channel, basically. I do agree with you guys that Christians need to have better answers for objections that you guys bring up and so on. So that's sort of the goal of my channel.
All right.
More thoughtful Christianity, I guess.
Very good. And you've been on here before, so welcome back. And Next we have the notorious Steve McRae. Steve, please introduce yourself. Not that you need any introduction.
That would be me. I'm Steve McRae. I have my own channel, Steve McRae, and also have the Great Debate Community channel. And I'm also the co-host of the Non Sequitur show, which we just all came from. And everybody who is watching that should be over here watching. If not, where are you?
They're recovering.
Probably. You know what? They're hitting the bar right now, and I don't blame them.
All right. Next, we will go with Paul from Paulogia. Paul, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, you just did. I'm Paul from Paulogia. That's about the most as I get. But I also sometimes I'm behind the scenes on the Shannon Q channel.
Yeah, that's right. You get to say that now.
Are you working for her now, Paul? Because that would be kind of apropos.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it works. Yep.
Yeah.
It works for me. It's totally fine. And last but not least, King Crockoduck. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm King Crockoduck. Give me your money.
All right. Well, that sums that up.
He's just a shill.
Yes, absolutely. Exactly. So today we're
I make almost no money from this. It's just a meme.
Yeah. Oh my God. No kidding.
You don't get the big evolution checks, man.
Yeah, that's right. I'm still waiting for my first one from the Skeptic Mafia, but they just never come. It's weird. They must be behind or something. But today we're going to have a little chat about objective truth. So just to give a little background to everybody who just joined today, I put out a video that was about deriving objective truth from your chosen doctrine. And I got some feedback that made me feel like maybe I should have some people on and we could have a little discussion and clarification about what objective truth is. I think a lot of people were conflating what I was referring to when it comes to the subjectivity of text and your choice in religion with something along the lines of reasoning. Is what it seemed to me. It seemed like people were justifying it by saying, well, if you have good reasons, then it's something that becomes objective. So I thought I'd get some other people on so that there'd be opinions other than my own here to kind of go with it. And Steve, I'll throw it to you first because you and I had the longest discussion after you were done trolling my comment section earlier with your Superman references. So can you kind of do you want to go?
They're good questions.
Maybe you can
sure. I think the first thing people need to look at is what is actually meant by objective fact, because as I was talking to you, I've said before that the whole objective-subjective distinction, I think, is kind of bad from the beginning. I think it was conceptually malformed, and I think that a lot of philosophers use these terms so uniquely and such with stipulative type definitions any longer that they don't really make sense to a lot of people, and people conflate a lot of different things. So I think the thing to start off with objective fact is, what does it mean by an objective fact? Now, some people say that it's just fact-based. It's based upon facts that comport with reality, right? If I say it is an objective fact that 1 + 1 = 2 because it's an analytical proposition, okay, that's something that comports with reality, and it's objectively fact-based. It doesn't require any kind of subjectivity.
Right.
But that gets into more after that. Well, okay, sure, objective facts exist. I don't think that many people argue that there are not objective facts that are not contingent upon subjectivity. Right. The question really becomes, what about moral facts, right? And are moral facts a type of objective fact? And I think that that's probably where you may want to start off, because that leads into the whole different world of what is a moral fact. Does objective morality exist? Are you a cognitivist or not? And I mean, do you want to just start with moral objective facts, or do you want to actually have a discussion on whether the objective facts exist or not? Because I don't know your.
Well, I think objective facts exist. All right, so I purposefully in the video steered a little bit. I'm going to cover it later, but I purposefully didn't even make sort of a tangential reference to morality. I assumed that that's probably where people's minds were going to go. but I didn't make any sort of direct references to morality. So I think we can all agree that objective facts exist. But when it comes to deriving objective truth from scripture or from doctrine, I don't think it's feasible or possible. I don't think that anybody can, claim that they have an objective truth and then point to a scriptural verse or a verse in any of religious doctrine and say, this is my backup for the fact that this is objectively true. That's essentially what I was saying. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's give JMD a chance. Like he's the Christian in the room, so let's give him an opportunity before we get too far into it to see if I'm out of line with his reasoning. What do you think about everything that you've heard thus far, JMD?
I like what Steve said. I think we have to go over what knowledge is because knowledge seems to indicate what is fact.
Okay.
So I would just define knowledge as a justified true belief.
A justified true belief. Okay. So, but can you justify a belief in something and have it not be, objectively a fact? I mean, you can find justification.
Well, if we mean 100% certainty, then technically not. It would be based on what's most probable.
Okay.
Beyond a reasonable doubt, not beyond any doubt.
Okay. So
my epistemology is basically our court systems beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right. Sure. Okay. So I've heard somebody else trying to talk. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to talk, but I think he makes a good point. I mean, and this is where it gets, again, so much involved in these discussions. The theory of knowledge is important, and so is a theory of truth. What do you mean by a truth? When you have a fact, you're saying, okay, a fact is something that's true. Then you have to ask, well, what does it mean by being true? And this is what you said in your video, and this is what I said. Well, if you say that truth is what corresponds to reality, which is correspondence theory of truth, then what about things that don't correspond to reality? Not everything has some kind of reality to it where you can say this is something we can point to and say this is why it's an objective fact.
Yeah, but your Superman example was bad there, Steve, because you can point to, even though you're saying can Superman fly, because Superman is a fictional character, the question immediately applies in the fictional universe in which Superman resides.
If you accept
it, because otherwise the question is just like, does Superman fly? The answer is, well, does Superman doesn't exist.
If the question is truth apt, only if you accept that fictional truth statements can have a value assigned to them. So that's contingent upon that. So if I don't accept that fictional truth statements can be true or false, then that statement has no meaning.
Well, no, then the answer to this statement is no, because Superman doesn't exist.
Well, even to bring it back to religion, you can say, did Adam and Eve eat the apple from the tree of life?
This is where I think certainty comes in. Because is it technically impossible for Superman to exist?
Yeah, well...
well, we're talking about Clark Kent, so we just...
Yeah. Well, that just to go with that example there, is it technically impossible for someone to have the characteristics like Superman? Is it technically possible for a planet like Krypton to exist?
It's possible only because it's not illogical, right? Anything that's not illogical is possible.
Yeah, so we've moved from truth values to coherence.
Yeah.
Well, coherence will really determine truth value because
not always. No.
I'd say coherence is a necessary condition for truth, but not sufficient.
Yes.
I
agree.
Well, and it also still doesn't address the primary claim in the video, which is that you cannot use doctrine. To my mind, you cannot use any scriptural doctrine as a foundation for a claim of objective truth. They can coincide, perhaps coincidentally, but you can't say that everything that comes from it is objectively true just by virtue of its existence. Does that make sense? Right. Did I explain that well?
Yeah. So, JMD, what would be an example of an objective truth from the Bible? Like, what would you think?
Well, I think whether did the universe have a beginning? Those are sort of whether how you.
I don't think that's an objective truth.
So you don't think the universe had a beginning? Basically,
it may or may not have.
Well, it depends on whether Big Bang cosmology is the best model or not.
Well, no, it depends on what you count as the universe.
Yeah.
Honestly,
well,
because what was before Planck time? What was before Planck time? You know, did the matter and energy exist? I don't have. Yeah, I just feel like it did. I feel like matter and energy are probably eternal, and so I wouldn't hang my hat on it. But so then what do you mean? Like, yeah, what do you mean by universe? And or do you mean cosmos, or do you mean like
cosmos, basically?
Now,
if there was a multiverse, and obviously that would be different than our universe. If
let's put to the side the question of the multiverse for a second, because I think what's being considered here is whether the Big Bang actually represented the beginning of the universe, or a phase transition from an earlier state to the current state. And prior to the Big Bang, if such a concept is even coherent, it's
well, I would agree with that. That's why I have different theories on time and so on. It would depend on A theory or B theory, I think, on your review of time.
So given that you've said a few times, it depends on. Does that not feed into what? But does that not feed into what Shannon is saying? Is saying, okay, so you said an objective truth in the Bible. Your first example was there was a beginning to the universe, and then you backed it up. But you backed it up by saying it depends on. So is it objectively true if you have to say, well, the Bible is true depending on all the other assumptions you're bringing?
Well, I wasn't necessarily saying their assumptions, whether A theory or B theory. That's why I said dependent on. But this is why if objective fact is based on knowledge and knowledge is 100% certainty,
I don't think it is.
Okay, I'll agree. Yeah. Then if it's most likely beyond a reasonable doubt that the universe had a beginning, then I think that would be an objective fact in the Bible. That's obviously the dispute we're having right now.
I don't
just to assert. I think we would all agree though that truth is independent of whether we know it or not, right? I think we would all agree with that.
Well, yeah, we could be in the Matrix or whatnot, but this is ethics of belief we're talking about here. So that's why I think it's beyond a reasonable doubt to believe that we exist, whether you take it.
I'm certain that I exist. That I can have epistemic certainty of. I am absolutely certain that I exist.
I'm not certain that I exist.
I am not absolutely certain if the universe had a beginning. That's why it cannot be an objective fact. Because we don't know factually if the universe had a beginning or not. There's still argumentation to be had on that. Whether can
I interject on this point? I'm not certain that I exist.
No, we don't know if you exist or not. Yeah, we agree with that.
But I am not certain.
So should we not even have this conversation since we're not even certain that we exist? So why should we?
Well, I am. He's not, but he has a different epistemic position than I. He doesn't have to be certain.
Now I think you just said that I'm not 100% sure that because technically if something is not. I would argue that besides Descartes' foundational point, that I'm at least a thinking thing. That's the one thing to be most certain of. Technically, I think if something is not 100% true, or most likely to be true, well, most likely would be assuming probabilistic here, but if something is most probabilistic, but it depends on whether the refutations are good refutations to bring it down to beyond a reasonable doubt, or not make it beyond a reasonable doubt for epistemology and so on. If you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Sorry to interject. So I can kind of get what you're saying. However, I'm still back to the point that, I mean, you say the universe started to exist. One can make a logical inference that the universe started to exist, right? Just by virtue of existing within the universe, that's a logical inference. So to say that, and you can find those types of inferences in text outside of the Bible. We'll use the Bible. I was just saying doctrines just to be universal, but you're a Christian, so we'll use the Bible. So you can find that inference in texts that predate the Bible, in writings that predate the Bible.
Of course. So, I'm not saying that.
Is there any
Hindu scriptures may? No, that would be an objective truth in the Bible if the claim is true, of course, which I do think it is, but that's sort of a different conversation, I guess. But if that is true, then there's a fact in the Bible, and that would technically be a doctrine or a teaching that the universe. Now, whether God created the universe, that would of course be the conversation.
Well, I did allow for overlap and coincidence, right? I think the Bible, just by virtue of existing, in a world being written by people who are capable of, testing hypotheses within the world and, observing things that happen within the world. Of course, it's going to just contain some objective facts, just
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's an objective fact that Jerusalem exists, right? The Bible says Jerusalem exists. We all agree Jerusalem exists. It's objective truth.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
so we're going to have to go to morality, probably.
Now, if you're talking about theology, then it would really depend on if God exists, and if God doesn't exist, then of course there's no truth in theology.
Okay.
Because, of course, theology is the study of God, so it's sort of dependent on whether God exists. That would be a question. Sure. It would have to be beyond a reasonable doubt for me to assent to the proposition being true, false, or true, false.
That's fair. That's an honest position, especially because you kind of got thrown into this conversation at the last minute. So thank you very much for being here.
I think about epistemology all the time because
I know you do.
I'm a philosophy student, so it's sort of my thing.
So let's go to morality then. I have a million questions about morality in the Bible because I've apologists come to me frequently and say, well, why do you even have morality at all if there's no objective morality that's dictated to you? Essentially, I'm paraphrasing that horribly, and it's a dramatic oversimplification.
You could have morality, but what would set yours apart from someone else's?
Right, exactly. So what's your position on that? Because that's probably where this argument comes into play the most frequently. So let's go there if everybody's comfortable with that.
I'm not as strong. I know IP, Inspiring Philosophy, has a bunch of good videos on the moral argument. I'm still working on the fine-tuning, and I'm actually going to be doing a video on that. But I would probably take sort of a Craig position. Of course, I'm learning about moral facts now, but the thing with moral facts is if something is an ought, then of course, like I think Steve used the example on one of his live streams was, if it's a moral fact to keep someone from burning, then it would be a moral fact. Or if it's an ought, then it would be a moral fact to remove them. If you want to do that, then the moral fact would be removing them from the fire or something like that.
What I said was, if it's your goal if you ground it in like a Harris approach and you ground it in reduction of harm and benefits, you want to increase benefits to an organism. If you ground it in that and you say a child is putting their hand in a fire, then you ought to remove their hand and to not cause them harm, right? So it is an ought relationship. That is objectively true, no matter what somebody thinks. If that is your goal, if you want to reduce harm, if a child is burning their hand in a fire, you ought to remove their hand from the fire. Now, there are other things you could do as well, but that's still an objective moral fact that if you don't do that under that grounding, you would be considered to be doing something immoral by not helping that child out. That would be one way to ground a type of moral framework that way, to show there's an objective morality fact that is true regardless of anybody's opinion.
Yeah. Or to say that another way.
Oh, sorry.
Just to say that another way, like if we all want to say, hey, if you want to win the game of chess, you ought to do this.
Yes.
And that's because we will all prehand agree what the rules of chess are, and within the confines of that, and given that winning is the goal, and we know what the rules are, then we can make ought statements. And so when I hear a theist say, well, how is your morality any better than others? Well, it's not any better. But if we are both agreeing to a set of goals, and we may not, and then we can never agree. But if we are agreeing to some goals, then we can start evaluating which morals are better than others at achieving goals.
I completely agree. Matter of fact,
the problem would become why is it an ought? I guess.
But that's because we agreed to a goal.
What the oughts are.
Let me see if I can break this down, because I think what Paul said is important because it's spot on. Look, if I always use the example because it's one of the simpler ones. If you want to win a race, you ought to run fast. Now, yes, you can go cheat, but it's still an objective fact that if you want to win, you ought to run fast. But I think we should make it clear that doesn't mean there aren't exceptions sometimes. In the game of chess, and Sam Harris makes this in his book, that even playing the game of chess, it is true. If you want to win, you ought to protect your queen. Right, but there are certain times that you want to give up your queen in order to win the game, because the goal is not to protect the queen so much as the goal is to win the game. So I think that we make a mistake by saying that you always have to follow certain things as far as morality, because not all moral frameworks are the same. And again, he points this out very articulately, saying that and I love this analogy, and see if you agree with me here, Shannon. In science, right? Some people don't get a seat at the table. And I know a lot of creationists bitch about that, but the reality is they don't get a seat at the table because they're not doing science. We reject a certain base level of people that do not have the skill set, the aptitude, the education, or the knowledge to get a voice in science. We reject a certain group, right? Or certain things that don't have the standards. That's the way science works. Why is morality any different? There's certain groups out there that we know don't get a voice in what is moral. Like terrorist groups. It's not moral to be a terrorist. Now, I think again, we've conditioned ourselves in a society to say, well, why does that make it moral? What makes it right or wrong? And yeah, there's definitely discussion to be had about that.
Right.
But I still don't. I think there's no problem just saying, look, without going into 1,000 hours of epistemological discussion, it is wrong to commit terrorism. Now, you can ground that and you can explain it very easily, but philosophers are past that point. They're not arguing whether terrorism is moral or not. They know it's immoral, right? So I think we've kind of just bogged down these conversations in a lot of times by saying, you know what, anything anybody thinks is moral is moral. Well, no, that's not.
I would actually think that the terrorists themselves think that terrorism would be wrong too, but here's the thing. They, of course, do not think they are terrorists. They think they are doing ultimately the word of Allah, so they think they're doing the ultimate good. So really, they may not think they're doing terrorism.
It doesn't matter. Creationists think they're doing the right too, but they don't get a seat at the table of science. Yeah. So why do they get a seat at the moral? Why do they get a seat at the moral discussions?
Wait, so you're telling me Kent Hovind is wrong?
Yeah, big surprise, right?
Everyone is telling you that right now.
Yeah, except for George hasn't figured that out yet, but whatever.
No,
that's right. He did agree with him for some things. Yeah.
No,
I used to be a big Kent Hovind fan. I'm not anymore.
I'm so proud of you. Good job getting.
You must be watching Paul's videos, right?
Huh?
You're no longer Hovind fan because you watch Paul's videos?
Nah, you just watch my debates with him.
What first did it for me was probably his King James onlyism. And then when I used to think that too, but then when you read about the manuscripts and so on, and what the church fathers thought of the creation account in Genesis, I don't think young earth creationism is a necessary doctrine to be a Christian and so on.
I'm a little disappointed. You said it was because of King James. I thought you were about to say King Crockoduck.
Oh.
It's not always about you.
He's a little high on himself today, can you tell?
Perhaps I'll send him some money.
He needs it.
That's funny.
Well, Kirk Cameroon, is
Kirk Cameroon. That
came up with his name.
That's right. That was too funny. That and Arsacotrachopithecus instead of Archaeopteryx. Oh my gosh! And then it rained ice sheets when Antarctica was tropical.
Now you're just hearing the things that we were laughing at about the non-sex show.
Yeah, sorry, people that might be out of context. Probably not out of context, but anyway. I have another question. I've been wanting to ask this question for a while. This is getting back on topic. Sorry, I'm great at getting back on topic. I know that's frustrating. So here's something that I encounter all the time, and I don't know if I have a good argument for it. I'm starting to formulate one, which is why I like having these types of discussions. When I get into this moral debate about, objective truth, it all automatically, wow, I'm just making up words, ultimately drills down when you get in these conversations to, well, how do you decide? Who decides that terrorism isn't moral? It's because you have an innate whatever, and God's written that on your heart, or how do you know? How do we determine? How do we decide that why do you feel that way? Why do we, how do you answer those types of questions for people who are better at, the philosophical approach and grounded more in that than I am. I'm interested in hearing about it because I feel like I have it well structured in my head to understand it, but I'm not able to articulate it well. So I'd be interested if anybody else can, because I find it difficult. Anybody?
Well, I just go back to what I said before, and it's kind of my answer is that it's all entirely based on agreed upon goals. And if you can't agree upon goals, you sure can't agree upon a moral system. So
Right.
if we can't agree that that human flourishing or decreasing suffering or something like that is the goal, then forget it. Then we're just not even having a chat. So if we can agree upon goals, then we can honestly discuss whether, and some of this is very gray, but we can discuss, whether one thing is 51% better than 49% better for something else in terms of achieving those goals.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then at that point, once you've agreed to goals, then a holy book is entirely irrelevant. Like maybe the holy book had an idea, But
what would be the ontological grounding for why we ought to have that?
Harms and benefits.
There it is.
that's what. Who cares? Who cares what the ontology? Why? Like I don't want to suffer.
Yeah.
I want my life to be awesome, and that's all I need. I want my life to be awesome because I'm a selfish creature that was evolved, or I'm just a horrible sinner, or something. But I still want my life to be awesome. So therefore, I can imagine that other people want their lives to be awesome because they're also terrible creatures that are sinners. Whatever. It doesn't matter why we want our lives to be awesome. We just do. And so if we can all agree that we'd like our lives to be awesome, then we have a start. And that's all you need.
Yeah.
But see,
the trouble is, could I comment on that?
Be quiet and then go JMD.
Yeah.
Sure.
The trouble.
Am I echoing?
Yes.
Oh, so.
It's because of me. I'll mute myself when I'm not talking. But the trouble is, whatever is going to make my life awesome is not necessarily going to make everyone else's life awesome. If we all agree that we want to have awesome lives and that we all that we want to basically maximize pleasure or minimize suffering, however you want to formulate it, there's going to have to be some set of trade-offs. And what's the most moral arrangement of those trade-offs? I guess.
Sure, but I guess what I was going with that was that I don't need a God to understand that I want my life to be awesome and you want your life to be awesome, so that it's, if we go back to the Nash non-compete theories, right? That we both, in order for the maximum of the group, we all sacrifice a certain amount. As you just said, I just think that the fact that I can understand that other people might also want to have a happy life is probably enough as a starting point.
I think the question should be, though, it should boil down to, even if somebody disagrees that that's the goal, it doesn't change the fact that if they did decide that goal was the goal, the objective moral fact would still be objective moral fact. So they can just say, well, I don't particularly have the same goal. It doesn't matter. If your goal to win the race is to win the race, you should run fast, right? Now, a person can say, well, I don't have the goal to win the race. Okay, it doesn't change the moral fact being a moral fact. So it really doesn't matter if people decide whether they want to have the same goals or not. But I think what it really even comes down to, JMD, is the theist tends to put forth this narrative, and it's a very false narrative, and they need to stop because it's wrong on so many levels. They think that if you have objective morality, the only way you can have that is grounded in a deity, and no serious philosopher thinks that way. No, I don't even think Plantinga would even say that. Now, does he agree with things like reformed epistemology and a way to rationalize theism? Sure. But I can't imagine a theist saying, look, if objective morality exists, it could only be the case that a God exists.
Well, I won't say only, because it would come down to my epistemology of beyond a reasonable doubt. So
but a lot of theists say that, and that's where they get into problems.
No, of course, if they gave a logical argument for that, then and it was sound and valid, then I think it would end up being the only way, or the best way possible. But I'm not as strong as on the moral argument, so I would be willing to admit that. But I think why people ground it in God would be God is a being. So if we want to ground it in something other than being, then I think the problem we get is why ought we do that? Why ought we listen to something besides a being in that sense? And if you look at God as a maximally great being who is all good and so on, whether God is all good, that's another question. But if God is all good, then you have this maximally great being who would, and if we're made in his image, then it would make more, to me, it would make you have a better odd system, I guess. I mean, I'm not strong. If I were to debate whether God exists, I probably won't use the moral argument, at least Craig's version.
Okay, but you just said yours was. Oh, sorry about that.
My bad. If I were to run a moral argument, it would probably be Craig's version, because that's the only one I know so far. That's why I'm studying more of IP stuff, modern philosophy.
Yeah,
he has a bunch of.
But again, the point being is that even Richard Carrier accepts objective morality. He's an atheist. And even Paul pointed out there are other ways to ground things. Even Wittgenstein grounded it in compassion or empathy. There's many different ways to ground objective moral frameworks. And when the theist posits this notion that to have an objective moral position, that you have to ground it in a deity, it's just fundamentally wrong. And then it leads atheists fall into this trap all the time. I hear atheists say, oh, well, a theist is positing that the objective morality is written into the universe and it's in the fabric of space-time. And
well, I
so
would
it's
say
like,
that.
yeah, but there are theists that say that.
Oh yeah, and there are
And then
theists that say the Earth is
but
young.
there's some atheists that hear that and go, "Oh, well, that's nonsense," because it is, because no reputable philosopher thinks that way. And then the atheist goes along their way.
Well, that would be more like Platonism.
Okay, fair enough. Right, sure.
Yeah.
Yes, but okay, but I don't think anybody accepts Platonism in that way. I mean, I don't know.
I don't think numbers are like.
I'm not a mathematical Platonist. I'm a nominalist. But what I was saying was that the atheist comes away thinking, oh, the only way you can have objective morality is if it's written into the fabric of space-time, and that's just wrong.
I would say it's written upon our hearts in one's conscience and so on, but that's from my Christian perspective. From
then how is it malleable then? You know what I mean? Like, I think nobody's addressed it thus far, but we're a social species. That we exist within cultures, within groups, within families.
Well, aren't baboons and other ape-like
creatures absolutely, and
creatures?
Just because they can't articulate it, that doesn't mean that they don't have some sort of sense of innate morality. They demonstrate empathetic behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So you can't just assert that they don't have any sort of morality just because they aren't able to translate.
Well, I would say it's more of a reaction.
Well, you can say that.
No.
You can say that, but they also have relatively well-developed frontal lobes and can learn sign language. So, I mean,
in addition to being a very social species, we're also a very tribal species, certainly. That's it's because of this tribalism that I think is innate, and I think is ultimately insurmountable. That I'm skeptical that any objective moral framework, religious or otherwise, is sustainable at the global scale. I do think that you need localized subjective moralities in order for society to properly function.
Well, both exist. You have both. I mean, you if you have an objective moral framework, you still have what's called descriptive moral relativism that's based upon cultural influences. Those definitely exist. I don't think anybody's going to say that morals are not contingent upon certain societal norms, right? But that doesn't discount the fact that objective morality exists. And that's what goes back to what I said from the beginning, is that there's this huge misunderstanding of it's either subjective or subjective or it's either one or the other. No, these terms are just a quagmire of bullshit any longer. I don't find any value in either of them, to be honest with you. What's that?
What I'm getting at is that for all practical purposes, if you're engaged in the business of setting up some, if we're not just idly speculating about what the good is, but if we're actually engaged in the business of trying to figure out how you frame a society on the basis of what the good is, I acknowledge that you have both. You do have an underlying objective moral framework, and then you have these other subjective frameworks that pop out in cultures all the time. But what I'm saying is the objective moral framework I don't think could ever be implemented for everybody on the planet.
Yes, I totally agree with that. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So a lot of us are just agreeing in circles, which is interesting. I didn't think that was going to happen. See, I see it. I don't understand.
Shannon,
go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask because, you said you had something percolating in your head and you were asking what we thought. Does what we were talking about correspond in any way to the answer you had percolating?
To a certain degree. I still have about a million questions. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to answer them on this stream. I have a lot of reading and stuff to do to kind of formulate this. But when I've encountered these arguments, it seemed to have been dismissed on many occasions that, the fact that we exist within social groups, obviously there's, I think morality is subjective and evolutionarily adaptive. I mean, obviously, if you do things that counteract the benefit of the group that you exist within, you being cast out of the group, ostracized, or punished by the group for going against the rules.
See, but then it will be... Oh, sorry.
Okay. Is obviously going to be detrimental to you. So it's beneficial to you to not harm other people, take their things, do things that make them angry. So whether or not even you just want to, live the best life, Of course, you want to do that. Everybody wants to do that. It can't be assumed that you altruistically want that for others as well. But you do have to exist within a group, within a society, and there's going to be a detriment to you if you don't do what's best for the group. And I think that is to a certain degree, at least, if not a heavy degree, what guides our sense of morality. But when I engage in these arguments, I'm constantly being met with the contention that, well, obviously it's innate. And I think that's mostly just because, or written on our hearts, because it seems, intrinsic and innate to us. It seems, self-explanatory. It seems to go without saying that you shouldn't just kill people. But I mean, there are people that have those inclinations, but they can't or don't. Some do, obviously. But for the most part, many would not, because of the fear of punishment and because of social pressure. So, that imposition of morality exists as well, but isn't really addressed, because I think in order for people to have moral discussions, they always kind of postulate the ideal or postulate the worst case scenario and don't allow for the spectrum in between. Does any of that make sense?
Yeah, let me agree with you, but maybe phrase it a little bit differently, because I do agree with you. But the only reasons why we have morals to begin with, and we are objects of moral concern. Mm-hmm. If humans didn't have sentience or just even intelligence, there would be no cause to have morality. There would be no objective moral facts anyways, right? The only reason why there are morals is the fact that we are social creatures. And same thing with animals. They have moralities because they're social creatures. And when we're born, we are born with the propensity to have moral concern. It doesn't mean that we have morality. It doesn't mean that we have an intrinsic understanding of morality is. These are learned things by society. Mm-hmm. That make more sense?
But I mean, I'm agreeing. I feel like that's just kind of an elaboration and maybe a little bit of a reiteration of what I just said.
This is why I agreed with you. Yeah, I just wanted to word it in a different way.
Steve and I
like better. But yeah, but no, I think you're right. I definitely think you're right, and that's why when I hear people like, "Oh, morals, some kind of intrinsic thing." Well, no, I mean, yeah, there's something to be said by what, and I hate to bring. I'm not going to say his name because I know you guys don't like him, but the FF dude. There's something to be said from this argument from gene meme coevolution, and that is a real thing. I don't agree with his conclusions, but we do have some kind of a genetic and cultural coevolution that morality has evolved with us along with evolution, and that is all societal based. Yeah. That's all because of like you said, tribalism and what's right and what's wrong. As far as, look, if you steal somebody, they're probably going to get upset. They're probably going to hurt you. Probably going to do something to kill you even, right? It's not beneficial for you to commit moral acts against somebody else, because if you think about it, every moral proposition is how you affect somebody else, right? This is one of the argument I made before in a dream. In a dream, there's no moral agency. There's no, it's inert. You cannot commit a moral act in a dream. And I know I've had atheists disagree with that, but they've never made a sound argument as to why, if there's no other moral agents of concern, then it's no different than you playing a video game and going sniping, computer-generated players or NPCs. There's nothing immoral about that. Right. And the same thing with the dream. It's just inert. So the fact that we have to be in a society, the fact we have interdependent relationships with each other, that's why there's morals to begin with.
Right. Before they're either inclinations or actions, and the actions are what we deem immoral, because you can't govern inclinations.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, I completely understand. I get that. On board with that.
Hallelujah.
With that 100%. I mean, most people at some point in time have had what they would generalize or identify as an immoral thought. Everybody would, I would think, at some point in time. You're able to entertain any concept in your mind. That doesn't mean that you're enacting it. It's when you enact it is when it becomes, an
absolutely
issue. When you instantiate it, that's when it becomes an issue. Just entertaining a thought in your mind it can't be innately immoral, just because otherwise you wouldn't be able to have discussions about morality, because you would have to entertain the concept of immoral behaviors. And that from a neurological perspective, it's really no different. So I agree. And to get back to, I have no problem saying friend of brother first name. To get back to his argument, it's an interesting argument, actually. And I've been contending with it for a while and looking into it, because it does have some, merit on the surface. But I think it also, for people that don't know his argument, this may be a little off track, but I think it assumes a state of stasis that would allow for the same conditions over time, and assume that those conditions would remain the same going into the future in order for it to have continuing efficacy. If that makes sense to you, Steve. And I mean, King Crockoduck's had conversations with him too about this, but I agree that there's merit to his argument. He's not just completely off the rails.
Right. I think his conclusions are where it goes wrong.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think that it's an interpretation thing. But yeah.
Well, and that's kind of, but that was a point that I made before to people. I think there's a knee-jerk reaction that a lot of atheists make, and I think that it's detrimental to the cause if they want to promote good science. Because look, I've seen the same thing happen when you had realistic nihilist and godless girl come in to one of my hangouts, and they started talking to R and Raw about Photo's argument against natural selection. Now, of course, Arn's a biology guy. He knows phylogeny very, very well. He's not a guy to go around and say he knows a lot about philosophy. He's not going to understand Photo's argument. And Photo's a brilliant atheist philosopher. And his argument is really nuanced, very difficult to understand. It took me a very long time to do it, with many hangouts with many people before I even had a basal understanding of it. But it's not a bad argument per se. It's not like it's a wrong argument. It's a very interesting argument. But of course, Arn's knee-jerk reaction was to say, oh, well, of course natural selection exists. We know now. What are you guys, idiots? And they were laughing at him because the argument isn't about if natural selection exists or not. It's about intentionality of states and coextensive traits and how much actual work natural selection does, if it's explanatory and predictive. That's the argument. And the same thing goes with like FF's argument. There's something to be said by the arguments himself, but it's a very complicated argument that even Dawkins makes in The Self as Gene. Mm-hmm. But his conclusions that somehow because of that, religion is a beneficial thing to society, I don't see how that follows.
I think it's because he feels that one can't, essentially, if you can't in that moment produce something to replace it in order to make groups cohesive and effectively deliver moral systems to those groups and have people adhere to them.
That's not a good argument, though.
I know. I've argued against it.
That's not a good
argument. I mean, he's not here, so to play devil's advocate, I mean, he should be represented fairly if we're going to have a discussion about him.
Yeah, no, I know you guys don't care for him. I happen to like the guy. I get along with him just fine. I don't play tribalism. I talk to him on direct messages all the time, and he thinks that my position is very, very rational, and I appreciate that. But I've taken the time to try to learn some of these arguments, and I don't dismiss them outright by going, oh, well, you're just a crank trying to promote this shit about religion and society. No, there's something to be said, but that doesn't mean that just because we haven't replaced it with humanism doesn't necessarily mean that religion is good overall. Because what got me is when he said that there's no evidence for religion having any influence on things like the poor way the gays are treated, right? I was like, what? Of course, there's huge evidence for that.
Yeah,
that was really surprising that he would say something like, or that there hasn't been evidence of damage to societies because of religion. And when like Godless Engineer brought up like Islam, he didn't want to touch that.
Yeah, I know he focuses on Christianity.
Right.
Yeah, he doesn't.
But if you're going to say religion, you got to take all or nothing, man.
I'm on your team.
Hey, buddy.
I agree. Does anybody else have anything they want to bring up before Steve's going to have an after show on his channel soon. So
we're going to play Younger Creationist Jeopardy.
Yay!
I was actually curious. Go ahead, Jamie.
Geez, there are a lot of things there I sort of want.
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess I'll comment on, did you say that morality is just simply trivial? Or tribunal, I guess? But it's based on tribes.
Not simply tribal, but there is a tribal element. I believe is what Casey was saying.
That's a component to its development. Yes.
And concerning moral facts, when Steve was talking about that, if someone wanted to drop a bomb on someone, I know this is an extreme example, but would that be a moral fact that if you want to drop a bomb on someone, that would be a moral fact to do that?
Why? That doesn't make much sense, actually. It would be a moral fact would be something like...
Go ahead.
If you don't want to harm somebody, you shouldn't drop a nuke on them. That would be a moral fact. You ought not to drop a nuclear bomb on somebody if your goal is not to harm people.
However, if the goal is to save,
on type of person.
If the goal is to save 1 billion people,
then that would be that'd be different. Sure.
And then and you might have to harm a smaller number for that. Then there's a conversation to be had. There's no absolute answer there.
Absolutely. That's why there's exceptions, right?
I guess.
Let's say go.
Oh, I guess I'm just questioning the ought and how you distinguish between why you ought not harm people and why you should. Whether for the bigger help, like 7 billion people or whatnot.
Right. I get your question, but that's
where would the moral fact come in?
The question
I get where the moral fact comes in. I take that back. Just
the question you're asking is a lot more difficult than I think we have time left for. You're asking what makes something inherently, what makes something bad? What makes something, why do we all have, that question goes into, if people want to look it up, I think it was, who was it? I can't remember his name. Did a paper, Thomas Nagel did a really good, he wrote a lot on this and about pain and the fact that, I cannot feel your pain. I don't know if you're actually experiencing pain, right? I can see signs. I can see you grimace. And that's all biological. Those are things that have evolved over time to be synonymous with pain. When you burn yourself, you shake your hand. If when you grimace when you're in pain. So we can look at somebody and say, look, I see that you are in pain, but I have no epistemic reasoning to say that I know that you're in pain as far as certainty, okay? Because I can't feel your pain. The only person that has knowledge of your pain is you. And if you have pain, even though it's almost like a tautology, but if you're experiencing pain, it is an objective fact you're experiencing pain. Nobody else, if somebody else says you're not experiencing pain, it doesn't matter. You're in pain. And even if you're not really physically in pain, it's still pain. Like people that have phantom limbs, they experience pain in their phantom limb. It's still a pain. It's still something that causes an emotional or physical response, whether it's biologically induced or psychologically induced, it's still pain. And so when we're saying that we don't want to harm somebody, we're having empathy. This is like Wittgenstein's thing for empathy. I don't want to harm Paul, right? I'm empathetic to him because I know what pain is, even though I can't feel his pain. I don't know what it is for him to experience pain. His qualia, and I know Shannon loves that word or hates that word, I can't tell. But his qualia is, you can tell me afterwards, but his qualia is different from my qualia, right? His experience of pain is different from mine. But from what I know about pain, I don't want him to experience it, so I have empathy. That's how we should base some of these things. By the way, what is your thing on qualia? Do you hate that, or you don't, Shannon? I don't remember.
Oh, I'm fine with qualia.
Okay.
I like a lot of Dennett's work.
Okay.
My
he came up with that kind of Okay.
My follow-up question will be, who should we have empathy for? I guess just how we feel, or is
God, that's a whole different question, isn't it?
Yeah,
JC, you want to take that one? I'll leave with the hard ones.
Yeah,
he's smarter than I am.
I think that's what the moral argument, at least Craig's. That's what Craig's tries to answer, I guess.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Oh, who should we have empathy for if that's going to be the moral standard, I guess? Because Muslims would have empathy for other Muslims and so on, and Christians would have.
Yeah, that's when the tribalistic aspect is going to take over.
And that becomes an issue, because then should you have empathy for people that are external to your tribe? And I would argue, yes, you should. But why? Right? That's one of these
questions. But realistically, you won't, is what I'm saying. Or realistically, not enough people will. And this is why I think that this kind of morality, this morality that everybody on the planet will be able to subscribe to and share, is not going to be sustainable.
I do agree with that. Yeah.
Because people are always going to other. That's what you think.
Correct.
That's why we don't have one established religion for the same reason, I think.
But so you don't think that it's feasible? And I mean, I don't want to get idealistic or unrealistic, and sometimes they're synonymous. So you don't think it's possible to at least extend? I feel as though it's extended wider than it has been previously, and I think that's a lot of that is by virtue of the fact that now we have more unfettered access to each other, and once people become less of a concept and more tangible in our minds as real things, real entities that exist, it becomes a lot more difficult for us to.
Well, if I can try to answer.
Go
ahead. Go ahead.
I think that our particular trajectory, especially in the West, where we have less of a tendency to other people, is a consequence of our specific cultural and historical particularities that are not necessarily shared by the rest of the world. I don't think that you will necessarily be able to imbue the rest of the world with the you would have to have them undergo a similar historical and cultural trajectory over perhaps even over a similar period of time in order to more or less get to where we are. This isn't necessarily the case for the member of every non-Western culture, but the culture as a whole, as you know. You can obviously look at individual examples, but by and large, the culture as a whole, I think, is going to be beyond our capacity to make fully commensurable.
But for JMD's question, when he said, who should we? And I don't even like the word "should" in any conversation. But if you have to say, who should we have empathy for? I think if you were trying to program an AI, if you gave the AI and said, well, here are going to be the moral goals that we have all somehow managed to agree upon, and how would an AI implement that in a way that was consistent with those goals? Obviously, would need to consider literally everyone. But if the trick is, you have to you're considering everyone, but the needs of everyone are not necessarily the same. To go back to Star Trek, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few of the one. Sometimes you have to pick. If you have to pick least suffering, for example, some people are going to suffer, and that's horrible. But you have to pick least suffering. Mm-hmm. And of course, humans, we have sort of this concentric circle. If we're all at the center of our own bullseye, we care most about ourselves, and then the next ring is, either those we love most or those who share our genetic material, and the ring beyond that are the people, in our city or our tribe, and there's these concentric circles moving outwards of who we care about, which is, I kind of think, what we're saying. Unfortunately, the way we have evolved with this tribalism of this concentric circle of care, even though we may care about a tribesman in Australia a little bit, it's never going to be the same because we've never met that person. We just know that theoretically they exist. So, sure. I mean, so who should we should is this weird question that I'm not even sure we can get into without shared goals. If we don't have shared goals, then we can't ask the should question.
And it's kind of ironic that it's not even just humans, but a lot of people, and I don't blame them, they have more empathy toward animals than some other people.
Right, and
because we have a stewardship, for animals, and we empathize with
mammals. Yeah. We have more empathy toward mammals than we do insects, which is this weird thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And should we? Is an ant intrinsically worth less?
Yeah, I hate that word "should" right there, though. Like what you said, what that should just is like, well, why should we? Why shouldn't we? I don't know if those are even really valid questions at some point.
Isn't ought the same as should, though?
That's why I dislike both.
I have a feeling I'm the only one here that believes in free will.
I don't believe in libertarian free will. I do tend more to compatibilism, but I got to tell you, I think that's even another whole different topic that I think is
being otherwise seems to be
I think compatibilism has problems too, and that's a deterministic type thing. So, but I don't think libertarian free will exists. No, not in.
Yeah, I think that's sort of essential for an ought system, a moral system. So I think that would be the biggest problem there for me, at least.
So JMD, you asked initially, how can without God, how can you have a moral system you can build things on? Can you at least acknowledge that among the four of us here, we've thought about it, and we have a way to do it?
I don't.
Quite a bit.
That would be stupid for me to deny something like that. And I agree that you are all probably Christians at some point, and this is why I do apologize, because I think a lot of the time most atheists were sincere Christians and just had bad reasons to believe. So. And I think that's because of the church nowadays a lot of times.
Well, bad reasons to believe. We may think that you have bad reasons to believe. So,
well, of course, but I almost became. I won't say. I'll say I almost became a hardcore agnostic from my studies.
Hardcore agnostics.
Hey, we got cookies.
Hey.
Come to my side.
Steve has that tattooed in an inappropriate place.
Damn right. I'm hardcore agnostic.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
you know, I got to tell you, and I told Shannon this earlier before we went on air, but I might as well say now. I got to tell you, after watching that hangout and that debate, KC, people like George pushed me more into atheism than anything else. I'm not even exaggerating.
I agree. I think
it's just like bizarre, the shit that man comes up with. And if that's what it takes to be somebody to believe, then no, who wants to do that, right? And I think that and I'm JMD. I'm not referring to you, but that makes all theists look bad in some degree, right? I mean, there are many theists I get along with very well. I respect, many of them. And there's these people on both sides of the fence, though. I see it on atheists and I see a theist trying to wedge a divide between the people like us actually wanting to have conversations. People like us and JMD and theists and atheists and agnostics, it doesn't matter, having conversations. And the people on the polar opposites, the far radical evangelicals and the far radical atheists that are just, and there's very few of them, but they do exist. And anti-theist is not a radical. Those are the ones that I think are really diminishing from the conversation and really taking it down roads that I don't really particularly want to go. So I appreciate us like this a lot.
Agree with that.
Yeah, and you can't see him as representative, though. That's like saying Ken Ham represents all Christians.
Well, right, and I don't. No, I don't.
He's not. He's representative of crazy people.
Yeah, so when a theist says, "Oh, look at this! What this atheist did,"
people everywhere.
But a theist will say, "Look what this atheist did. He's representative of all atheists." It's like, no, that's the same kind of fallacy.
Yeah.
Right.
I personally think the church nowadays is far off from mere Christianity and how the original church fathers thought about this stuff as well. Because Paul and you see in Acts and in Romans where Paul is interacting in Acts 17 with pagan beliefs and so on, and he's not necessarily coming at a hostile position like many church people nowadays do and so on.
Yeah.
I got to wrap this up.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, chat. I typed things in the chat this time. I'm pretty proud of myself. Usually I don't do that at all.
Usually not that coordinated.
I'm not. No, I'm usually too focused. But, when Steve talks, I drift off anyway. So I thought I'd take that. Go type in the chat.
I'm like NyQuil, baby. Just listen to me on live. You'll be asleep in minutes.
That's right. So where is the Hangout's going to be on?
The Hangout's going to be on my channel. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So everybody leave here and go watch Young Earth Creationist Jeopardy. That's what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
On Steve McRae's channel. And thanks, guys.
I can already guess the best argument against evolution.
Oh, God.
And why are there still other apes?
It's pretty good. If you watch the Flat Earth Jeopardy one, because that was brilliant. I thought that was really fun.
All right. Abrupt stop. Bye, guys.
Good night.